There are wild places where nature still keeps some of her strangest work hidden in plain sight. The Olympic Peninsula, a mass of solid rock sitting at the far northwest corner of the continent. Surrounded by ocean on three sides. One side receives 12 feet of rain every year, while the other gets almost none. The same mountains creating two completely different worlds on the same day. The rain built a temperate rainforest that most Americans don't believe exists in their own country. A place where fallen trees take decades to rot, and new ones grow directly on top of them because the floor is too dark to survive on. How do the trees feed themselves from fog alone on days it hasn't rained at all? How does a salmon swimming upriver to die end up being the reason an entire forest stays alive? How have species that exist nowhere else on Earth survived on a single ridge, a single lake, a single stretch of coastline? We spent weeks researching this peninsula, and one detail we found still doesn't sit right with me, but more on that later. Ruby Beach is a giant rock garden dumped straight into the ocean, with towers of stone and walls of driftwood, as if a storm froze mid-tantrum. At low tide, the whole shore shifts into a mini alien city, pools packed with bright sea stars and anemones gripping the rock like sticky candy that refuses to let go. Those cheerful pools can vanish fast, swallowed by rising waves that turn gentle puddles into a moving maze where a single wrong step means soaked shoes and a racing heartbeat. The logs are the real plot twist. They seem harmless, but the surf can toss them around so easily that a rolling trunk hits harder than a charging linebacker. People have climbed those logs for photos. One surprise wave later, the wood spins, they go down, and it's over before they can shout. Compared with flat, sunny postcard shores, this place runs more like a training ground. The ocean does not care about your snacks, your toys, or your overconfidence. When the foam lines fade and the tide pulls back, these waters become the front row for humpback whales. Out past the break, something enormous moves through without a sound. Backs and blows visible from the same sand where those dangerous logs still roll. They treat this stretch like an all-you-can-eat stop, gulping clouds of tiny fish and shrimp, the way someone might tilt a cereal box and chase every last piece. Sometimes they trap prey by blowing rings of bubbles, then rocket straight up through the middle. The fish never see it coming. What makes it even wilder is that bubble net feeding isn't instinct. It's a learned skill, passed between whales the way a recipe gets handed down through a family. Each year they make one of the longest migrations of any mammal, travelling from warm breeding waters far to the south, all the way up to cold, food-packed stretches like this one. But feeding here comes with real risk. Busy ship traffic can slam into them, and the harshest proof is a whale washing ashore with bruises and broken bones. Many carry scars from fishing lines too, dragging heavy gear just because they chased food into a strip of water crowded with nets and ropes. Following that coastline a little further brings everything to a sudden stop. Stone walls, bunkers, and the ghost of a military post called Fort Casey. A maze of grey concrete and giant metal bones, all of it built to stop enemy ships from ever getting through. Not a single one ever came. The cannons were clever tech for their time, able to fire, then drop out of sight behind the walls like someone ducking behind a couch mid-game. The weapons standing here now are not even the originals. The park basically went shopping for second-hand artillery after the early ones got scrapped. Back then, this fort linked up with two others across the water in a triangle of fire, so any ship sneaking past had to survive shells coming from 3 directions at once. The same concrete platforms soldiers once rushed across are now covered in sneaker prints and picnic crumbs, which is either progress or a very strange glow-up for a war machine. The bunkers still bite though. Rescue crews have been called out after people misjudge a dark stairway or a sharp ledge, because these walls do not care how curious you are. But the real story was never inside these walls, it was always in the forests, coastlines and peaks of the Olympic National Park. Few parks on the continent pack this much strangeness into one place, and most people who visit barely scratch the surface. The mountains were not shaped by wind or rivers, shoved up from the ocean floor by colliding tectonic plates. Every peak here is essentially old seafloor pointing at the sky. That slow collision also cut the peninsula off, just enough that entirely new species formed here. The Olympic marmot and the Olympic torrent salamander exist on this peninsula alone. The weather here does not follow normal rules either. One side can be soaked while the other basks in dry sunshine. Same day, completely different world. It also racks up search and rescue calls year-round. A hiker once fell trying to rappel down a canyon just to collect water, and a teenager went over a waterfall on a wet rock, while others stood there watching. Not everyone who goes in comes back out. Head to the western edge of the park and the whole mood shifts. The forest gives way to something rawer, louder, and a lot harder to predict. Rialto Beach looks like the ocean picked a fight with the cliffs and won. Sea stacks, fallen arches, and driftwood scattered like the aftermath of something enormous. The rocks here started as lava that erupted underwater, hardened on the ocean floor, and got shoved upward over time. So every cliff face is essentially old volcanic crust in disguise. Sneaker waves here run up the sand so far and so fast that standing on dry ground is no guarantee you stay dry. One winter storm was enough to knock a sea stack that had stood for centuries completely flat. Just behind the shoreline, the wetlands draw in a completely different kind of visitor, the northern pintail. Among ducks, few cut through the air quite like this one. A long pointed tail acting as a natural rudder, letting it shift direction mid-flight with a precision that makes other waterfowl look clumsy. Males chase rivals across the water with bills open and heads dragging low, like someone storming through an argument at full speed. But once a female chooses, he vanishes entirely, leaving her to raise the ducklings alone. When the birds thin out and the tree line closes in, the forest takes over completely, and it only gets stranger from here. The Hoh Rainforest is one of the last true temperate rainforests left in the world, pulling moisture from the Pacific year-round with almost no dry season to speak of. It gets more rain in a single year than most cities see in a decade, and even on dry days the fog rolls in thick enough to make up the difference. Trees grow so tall and densely packed that sunlight barely touches the floor, and fallen logs take so long to rot that new ones sprout directly on top, using dead wood as a raised platform to reach the light. The Hoh River Trail carries its own ghost story. Hikers have reported disembodied voices and laughter along one stretch, and a figure in damp clothing has been spotted at the riverbank before vanishing into the mist. One hiker missed the trailhead, slid down a steep embankment, lost all her gear, found herself trapped by a river she couldn't cross, and had to wait in an open meadow for a helicopter to pull her out. Two others were killed when a tree came down on a popular path. No storm, no wind, just a forest operating entirely on its own schedule. Past the trail's edge, the canopy closes in and moss takes over everything. What you're walking into here is one of the most moss-heavy places on the planet. Every surface so completely buried under green that even the rocks have disappeared beneath it. Moss has no roots and no protective outer skin. It pulls every drop of moisture directly from the surrounding air, and fog, which is why it never dries out, even in the driest months. When enough of it piles up thick in the branches, it stops behaving like a plant and starts acting like actual soil, trapping leaves, capturing debris, and forming an entirely new layer of ground high up in the canopy. Trees here have actually been recorded growing roots straight out of their own branches to tap into this floating carpet of nutrients. That same hanging lichen is what the deer and elk come here specifically to eat, and it can only survive under the permanent shade of the old growth canopy. If you sat still on a mossy log here long enough, the forest would probably just grow right over you. From here, the sound of rushing water pulls you further into the park, and what's waiting just ahead is even harder to believe. Salduke Falls does something almost no other waterfall does. The river hits a sharp right-angle turn, splits into separate channels, and plunges into a narrow canyon below. The name comes from the original people of this valley, translating as magic waters, with a whole legend around it. That story goes like this. 2 dragons fought for years to a standstill, crawled back into their caves in shame, and their tears became the hot springs just up the road. Those flat rocks at the very top look like a natural platform, easy to stand on, easy to pose on, and just slippery enough to end everything. Directly beneath the drop, fish hold steady in the current, completely unbothered by the tons of water crashing down above them. From here, the trail leads out toward the water, and the lake waiting at the end of it barely looks real. Lake Crescent sits so still, it looks like painted glass. The water so clear you can see straight to the bottom, where most lakes would have gone completely black. That clarity comes from a near total lack of nitrogen, which means algae barely survives here, and without algae, nothing clouds it. A massive landslide once split this into 2. Lake Crescent on one side, the much smaller Lake Sutherland on the other, 2 halves of what used to be one. The bottom has such cold, still, low oxygen water that it can turn a submerged body into something closer to a bar of soap than a skeleton. When that same landslide cut the lake off from the river system, the fish trapped inside adapted, and 2 entirely new species of trout evolved here. Early settlers who tried farming the shoreline gave up almost immediately, pivoted to hosting fishermen instead, and the lake has been a resort destination ever since. From the shore, the ridge above looks like a straightforward hike. It isn't. Mount Storm King earns its name from a local indigenous legend, a mountain spirit so furious at warring tribes below that it hurled giant boulders down to separate them. Those rocks still sit at the bottom of Lake Crescent. The official trail stops well before the summit, but most hikers push past the signs anyway, hauling themselves up on ropes left behind by strangers. Ropes with no rating, no anchor, and no guarantee. Few birds actually survive at this elevation, but one of them has been hunting these skies and the lake directly below for as long as anyone can remember. That bird is the bald eagle, and the waterways cutting through this park rank among the most productive hunting grounds on the Pacific coast. When a catch is within reach, the drop is fast and deliberate. Talons out, barely skimming the surface, fish gone before the water even settles. When hunting runs dry, they skip the effort entirely and go straight to theft, tracking ospreys mid-flight, harassing them until the fish gets dropped, then swooping in before it hits the water. Think of it as the most aggressive food delivery service ever invented. A mated pair returns to the same nest year after year, adding material every season until the whole structure weighs as much as a small car, the heaviest bird nest of any species on the continent. Despite all that presence and power, they were nearly gone entirely. Not from any predator, but from a pesticide that thinned their eggshells so badly, the eggs collapsed under the weight of the parents sitting on them. Just off the lakeshore, a trail cuts into the trees, and tucked inside them is a waterfall most people walk straight past. Marymere Falls. This waterfall was named after a homesteader's sister, a woman who never imagined her name would outlast everything she built. What makes it work is simple geology. The creek flows fine until it hits a sudden shift from hard rock to soft, and at that point the ground gives way. Getting there feels easy, flat, well-worn, family-friendly, right up until the final climb turns steep enough that some turn back just short of the top. This place earns its reputation with one clean drop. The next valley got its nickname with 10,000 of them. Come spring, every crack and ledge in the cliffs releases water all at once, separate falls running simultaneously down the same rock face from every direction. By late summer, most of them vanish completely. The same cliffs that ran white go bone dry. Sitting in the middle is a hand-built log chalet, once a wilderness retreat, later a wartime lookout, and eventually dragged uphill just to escape the river. North of the valley, the forest disappears and the ridges take over, swept by winds so consistent that the entire area was named after them. Hurricane Ridge got its name the honest way. The winds here hit gale force on roughly 1 out of every 6 days, and actual hurricane-force gusts roll through several times a year. The visitor centre burned to the ground not long ago, destroyed by a fire that started in the building itself, not from any storm or lightning strike. On a clear summer afternoon on a popular trail, a mountain lion attacked a 4-year-old child near the main viewpoint, biting down before the father pulled the animal off with his bare hands. The Olympic marmot lives here and nowhere else on Earth, a species so specific to this ridge that if these meadows go, the animal goes with them. It looks like a groundhog that wandered into the wrong zip code and decided to stay. But it fills a real role, whistling across open meadows to warn the whole ridge when something dangerous moves through. From the ridge, the Pacific is already visible, and that coastline is exactly where the next stop lands. Shisha Beach sits on Makah tribal land. To get here, you need permits from both a sovereign tribal nation and the federal government. The bluffs above hold traces of gold, platinum, and rare minerals found in only a handful of places along the entire Pacific coast. Point of Arches runs entirely on the tide's schedule. At high water, the rock walls seal off, and anyone without a tide chart is simply not getting back. Beneath the sand lies a World War II troop transport that snapped its tow line in a storm, ran aground here, and never left. The shoreline gives way inland to a place where the rainfall is so relentless it has produced something closer to a jungle than a forest. Sitting at the edge of one of the wettest spots in the country, Lake Quinault Lodge is surrounded by a rainforest that gets more annual rainfall than most of the Pacific Northwest. Under the canopy, oil seeps naturally through the soil, and this forest has been quietly contested for energy rights because of it. Back at the lodge, a ghost reportedly still occupies one of the rooms. Staff have reported flickering lights and shifting objects for decades. The peaks behind all that rain are visible from here, and the tallest one sits directly above it all. Mount Olympus sits at the centre of the peninsula, and the glaciers covering its peaks are what feed every river, lake and rainforest below. The mountain holds more active glaciers than Glacier National Park, which, given the name, feels a little embarrassing. Those glaciers have already lost half their total mass, and most of them are on track to vanish within this century. Getting to the summit requires crossing glaciers, sheer rock faces, and some of the most unpredictable weather on the west coast. All that precipitation drains into the valley below, feeding the same rainforests and rivers that define this entire peninsula. Quinault rainforest is one of the rarest ecosystems on the planet, a true temperate rainforest in a country most people don't associate with rainforests at all. The salmon that die in the river here don't just feed bears and eagles. Their decomposing bodies are what actually fertilise the trees. The moisture here is so constant that spiderwebs never fully dry out. They stay outlined in dew all day. Banana slugs the length of a hand patrol the forest floor here, and they are the primary recyclers, keeping this entire ecosystem running. Right at ground level, ferns have taken over every gap the canopy left behind. The ferns covering this floor belong to a plant group that survived every mass extinction on record, including the one that wiped out the dinosaurs. Long before this forest was ever studied or protected, these ferns were already being used for food, medicine, and cooking. What makes them remarkable is that ferns don't produce seeds or flowers. They reproduce by releasing spores so small they float invisibly through the air. They are also one of the oldest plant groups still alive on Earth, predating every flowering plant and every tree standing here right now. On the warmest days of the year, a walk through this floor means breathing in clouds of invisible spores. Most people pass through completely unaware. The licorice fern looked at the ground, decided it wasn't interested, and started growing directly on tree trunks and the mossy branches instead. All of this growth is fed by one thing, the rain, and the sheer amount of it here is its own story entirely. The rain here isn't just frequent, it falls in quantities that most weather systems can't produce in a full year. storm clouds roll off the Pacific, slam into the Olympic Mountains, and drop everything they're carrying right here on the western slopes. On the other side of those same mountains, the ground is so parched it looks nothing like the same peninsula. Two places a short drive apart can have the rainfall difference of a desert and a rainforest. Same mountain range, opposite worlds. That same moisture never fully leaves. It settles low, clings to the treetops, and what stays behind is fog with an actual job to do. What looks like leftover weather is actually a second water source, pulling moisture into the forest on days when it hasn't rained at all. The trees pull water directly out of the air, through their needles and bark, funneling it down to the roots below without a single raindrop involved. On the dry summer days, fog alone keeps this place alive. It muffles sound almost completely, which is why this forest sits in near silence even when the wind is moving overhead. Mountain goats released into this park thrived so well in the fog-covered terrain that removing them became one of the most complex wildlife operations this park has ever run. The fog is also thick enough to disorient hikers on established trails. Search and rescue operations here spike every time a heavy fog rolls in. Past the tree line, the air clears, and a lighthouse appears right at the end of a narrow strip of land. Volunteer keepers are the only reason the new Dungeness lighthouse still runs. Civilians who sign up to live on the spit for a full week, reachable only on foot. The ground beneath never stops moving, sand shifting and rebuilding at the tip so fast that the structure has been reinforced multiple times. The word new in the name is the oldest lie on this coastline. This lighthouse has been operating longer than any other in Washington. Just inland, the timber industry left a company town so well preserved it looks untouched, and that's Port Gamble. The whole town was built to look like a Maine fishing village, because the men who founded the mill were homesick and just copied the place they came from. When the operation shut down, the jobs disappeared, but the buildings stayed and were kept as a historic company town. Nearly every building has paranormal reports on file, and mill workers were writing down ghost encounters, even back when admitting you saw something would get you laughed out of the room. One building reportedly whispers, "Get out," to anyone who steps inside, which honestly is a fair reaction to having strangers poke around your house for a century. From here, the coastline continues northwest, past the shipping lanes and into increasingly remote territory, until it reaches Cape Flattery. At this point, you're standing on the very tip of the contiguous United States, where the strait ends and the open Pacific begins. The name came from a miscalculation. An explorer arrived, convinced himself a sheltered harbour was hiding just behind the cape, and named it after the false hope it gave him. The lighthouse doesn't even sit on the cape. It occupies a small island just offshore, reachable only by helicopter or boat on calm days. When construction began on that island, the Maka tribe resisted so forcefully that the builders armed themselves and put up a fortified blockhouse before a single stone was laid. Even after it was finished, the Maka broke into the keeper's storehouse, struck the keeper, and reportedly threatened to kill him. And the light stayed on. Supplies reached the lighthouse once or twice a year. Firewood, livestock, and at one point an entire piano, all paddled out in dugout canoes. The same waters just offshore are now home to one of the ocean's most effective predators, the orca. Two completely different types of orca hunt off this cape. One eats only fish, the other hunts marine mammals. Despite sharing the same waters, the two groups rarely interact. Calves stay with their mothers for life, and the older females lead the group. The pod's survival depends almost entirely on what the eldest female knows and remembers. The fish-eating population is struggling, with numbers dropping for decades tied directly to the decline of the Chinook salmon they depend on. The hunting group tells a different story, documented taking on prey as large as grey whales, coordinating attacks the way wolves work a herd. Each pod runs on its own distinct dialect, specific enough that researchers can identify individual family groups by sound alone. Where the orca rules the water, the rocks above belong to a bird that's just as territorial. The black oyster catcher doesn't eat oysters. Despite the name, it lives almost entirely on mussels and limpets, pried off rocks with a bill that glows bright orange-red. It has two techniques for opening a shell. If the mussel is slightly open, it jabs in and cuts the mussel. If shut tight, It hammers until something gives. That same nest gets used year after year, built by flicking pebbles and shell fragments into a scrape with a sideways toss of the bill. Chicks are fed by both parents long after they can fly, and that slow start is part of why the population stays small. The population is small enough that scientists use it as a health indicator for the entire intertidal zone. If the oyster catcher is doing well, everything below the waterline is too. From these exposed rocks, the coast curves southeast toward Fort Worden State Park, a military fort built to guard the same stretch of water. Built as part of a coordinated defence system, it was designed to obliterate any enemy fleet before it ever reached the mainland. The cannons here were so powerful that their shells had to be hauled up from underground bunkers by a mechanical lift, each one heavy enough to flatten a house. Despite all that firepower, the guns never fired a hostile shot. They were eventually stripped, scrapped, and sent off to other wars. Underneath sits a drained underground cistern with acoustics so surreal that a single hand clap keeps bouncing long after it should have stopped. The voices in these bunkers were meant for commands and gunfire. The next ones in this story come from a quieter place. The Jefferson County Courthouse isn't just a government building. It was deliberately placed on the highest ground in town so everyone would know who was in charge. The clock tower still runs on dropping weights, not electricity. It's basically a giant grandfather clock, bolted inside a government building. Step inside, and the hand-carved oak courtroom looks exactly as it did when it opened. Not a single piece replaced. This building represents order, and just beyond it, the land refuses to follow along. Kaloch Beach is one of the few places on the Pacific coast where old-growth rainforest and open ocean meet at the same edge. The cliffs along this stretch are actively eroding. In one spot, the ground beneath a tree has hollowed out completely into a cave. Its roots pull moisture and nutrients directly from the air itself. That's how a tree in that position survives. That tree clinging to the bluff is not a one-off. It's one small example of how life hangs on along this coast. The Sitka spruce grows strong and tall to withstand salt, wind and winter storms. Its needles work like tiny armour plates coated in wax, so salt spray can hammer them for days, and they still keep the tree alive and working. Instead of growing perfectly and straight, it twists and bulks up its trunk, and roots to lean into the wind, turning every storm into a training session. The bark is packed with natural chemicals that slow down rot and insects, so when a trunk finally falls, it can stay firm enough to act as a bridge or walkway. Fallen giants don't go to waste. Smaller spruces sprout along those old trunks like kids using a fallen log as a balance beam. Roots spread wide and shallow through the thin coastal soil, stitching the bluff together even while waves keep chewing at the base. Dense branches near the shore stack into natural windbreaks and perches, just right for a noisy heavyweight that prefers an ocean view. Stellar sea lions haul out along Kaloch's coast like a gang of wet, barking bulldozers. Their thick blubber works like a built-in wetsuit and life jacket, so they can hunt in cold, rough water for hours, while smaller animals would be knocked out in minutes. In the surf, they twist and roll through breaking waves, using the white water itself as cover to ambush fish that never see the dark shapes coming. On land, the act changes. Big males throw their weight around, with chest-to-chest shoves and roar-offs, settling arguments without claws or horns. Pups learn by copying the chaos, practicing short dives and awkward porpoise jumps next to full-grown adults that move like torpedoes with flippers. When they're all on the rocks together, the noise carries far down the coast, turning the shoreline into a living foghorn for anything trying to sleep nearby. That noisy brawling on the rocks is one way to hold territory. Fort Flagler State Park represents another, built to control who came through. All this concrete and gun steel had one job: to look dangerous enough that no enemy ship ever dared to test it. Crews trained here for an attack that never showed up. Locals joked that the only thing that ever invaded the place was boredom and fog. Old tunnels and bunkers now feel more like a playground than a battlefield, with kids sprinting through rooms that were built to handle smoke, shock, and panic. From these quiet gun pits, it's a short step from war stories and watchtowers to a place built for comfort and gossip instead of cannons and alarms: Manresa Castle. The mood flips fast here, from drills and sea fog to sharp corners, tall ceilings, and a staircase that feels more like a small stage. Later, the house went quiet and strict, trading noisy dinners for prayers and long, careful walks in the hall. Now it leans into the rumours, with guests swapping stories of footsteps, soft knocks and doors that seem to move between check-in and breakfast, like the building is in on the joke. After the legends, what comes next is practical. Fairholme is not about stories, it is about camping, paddling and hiking. This little lakeside hub feels like a front porch to a giant water world, where a simple boat ramp and dock suddenly open into miles of quiet, cold lake. And tucked in the forests above the shore, one bird hammers on old trunks so loudly it sounds like someone knocking on a door with a power tool. The pileated woodpecker. Around Fairholme, this woodpecker hits a trunk like a jackhammer, tossing out chunks of wood so big the base can look freshly chainsawed. When it finds a rotten log full of ants, it carves a long trench, ripping it open the way a kid tears into a cereal box just to grab the toy. Those deep holes become ready-made apartments for owls, ducks, bats and small mammals that could never cut wood like that themselves. On a good feeding tree, it will climb, hammer, listen, then shift a few steps to strike again, working the trunk like a careful, noisy prospector. Around Fairholme, these woodpeckers do most of this heavy work, cutting long rectangular scars into old firs and dumping fresh wood curls across campsites and paths. Larger cavities in dead trunks rarely stay empty, quietly turning into nests and hideouts for other birds and small mammals in this patch of forest. This is the Olympic Peninsula, a land of hidden wonders and remarkable architectural marvels. Now, if you don't want to miss the most unreal wonders of Madagascar, check out this video.